The news is obviously broken today, which is that Glasgow City Council has fallen victim to a cyber attack. And I'd just like to ask you firstly, this happened almost a week ago. Why is it that we're just hearing about it today?
So when we found this had happened, we initially took steps to isolate the servers which had been affected. We immediately contacted the UK and Scottish government's cyber experts and Police Scotland. And the advice we were given in the early stages of an attack like this is to not reveal that you are under attack in this way, to avoid giving information which might be useful to either the people who have done this or to other people who may want to do this. We were confident early on that the attack had stopped, it wasn't progressing, and so that gave us a bit of time to have a think about it. But you have to balance this, because on the one hand, we fully accept the advice, which is don't give away information that could be useful. But as the incident moves on and the risk of data having been removed from your system becoming public grows, it's important to give advice to your customers to act to protect themselves. So absolutely legitimate to not publicise these things early on in the attack. There comes a point where you have to decide to publicise what's happened, and for us that today was that day.
Can you talk us through exactly which services are impacted, what sites are down at the moment?
Sure, so there's quite a long list of services which are down, and that full list is on the Council's website. But essentially it is many of the ways that people interact with the Council online using forms. So things like paying parking fines or bus lane fines, viewing planning applications, that sort of thing. It's important to say that those services are not down because of the attack. The attack hasn't taken those services down. What's taken the services down is that we isolated the servers which were affected straight away, and as a consequence of isolating those servers, those services have become unavailable.
Yeah, so I suppose interacting with forms then, that's where the sort of issue lies. Does that make this quite wide-ranging then, in terms of it's not just Glasgow City Council residents that are impacted by this? It's maybe anyone who's used a form, to pay a parking fine, to view
yeah, so the services that are affected will not just have been used by Glasgow City Council. It is things like bus lane or parking fines, and conceivably people who are outside of the city could, for example, have made planning applications or could be interested in planning applications. So no, it's unlikely that the only customers who have used this are Glasgow citizens. People from outside of the city have probably used these services as well.
So what does it mean for people who do have, say for instance, an outstanding parking fine that they need to pay? Obviously it goes up in price after a set amount of time as well. How are those people going to be impacted?
So most of the services which are affected, and in particular penalty charge notices, have always had an offline method of communication. If you receive a PCN, there's details on there about how you can pay by telephone. Now, our telephone lines are probably going to be busier than they otherwise would have been, because people will be telephoning us to do that. But that service in particular has always had an offline variant. Where we don't have offline variants, we are working to try and spin something up as quickly as we can. As we get towards the end of our analysis of what's happened, we'll begin to start to understand how long it will take to bring those services back up. Our preference would be to just bring the existing services on those servers back up. If it's looking like that's going to take an unreasonable length of time, we've got a separate piece of work which will begun to look at whether we can create parallel online services hosted somewhere else on the estate.
Can you mention specifically which services are actually the ones that don't have the offline equivalent?
So right now, we don't have an offline equivalent for viewing planning applications, for example. That's not one that you can, at the minute, just walk in and do. So we need to start working on that. Some of the other services that are on there are really quite limited in interest. So you can't, at the minute, view the council calendar, which sets out which committees we have. Now, if you are a journalist or somebody who's interested in something that's happening at the committee, that's going to be quite important to you. But we're about to move into the council's summer recess. We only have one more formal meeting before that happens. So the impact of that service, which is purely online, is mitigated. What we are doing is where people are particularly interested in getting copies of papers, we've got paper copies that people can come to the chambers and pick up if they want to.
I noticed part of it that was impacted was to do with the search certificates and with the registrar and things like that. So for anyone looking to register a death or get a marriage certificate or register a birth, how are they impacted by this?
So the problem with registrars is in making appointments to go in. So we are likely to put in place a system whereby people can phone for an appointment or come in for an appointment, and we'll be announcing that in the coming days.
You've obviously said that you've presumed data might have been stolen in this incident. Can you talk to us about what kind of data we're talking about here? Is it names, addresses, national insurance numbers? What is it that we're actually looking at?
So the first thing to say is we are extremely confident that payment information would not be amongst any data that's been removed. And that's because if you use any of these services to make a payment, the actual payment part of the transaction moves to another third party. Our payment provider is separate from the hosting provider that we're talking about here. So we're confident that that data hasn't been removed. We're not actually able to say for certain that any data has been removed. What we've seen is early on in the attack, we saw some unusual traffic on these servers. But the forensic exercise we're doing hasn't yet demonstrated any conclusive evidence that data has been removed. Really, our announcement today is just to say to people there is a theoretical possibility that this has happened and to ask them to be particularly cautious. So if you've used any of the web forms that are currently unavailable and you are contacted by somebody claiming to be from Glasgow City Council, what we're saying to you is it's very unlikely that that person is from Glasgow City Council. Certainly, we would never ask you for passwords or payment details over the telephone. And if you think that you've been contacted by somebody who has your data unlawfully, we're encouraging you to call the police.
Yeah, and understandably, people will be quite worried about this. How has it taken almost a week and to get confirmation about whether data has been lifted, and when can we expect confirmation definitely whether it has or hasn't been?
Whether it has. We completely understand that this will be that this will cause some anxiety to people, and given that we don't know for certain that data has been removed, we had to consider very carefully whether we would make this announcement or not. We don't want to unduly concern people. We just feel that as this incident goes on, the likelihood of, if data has been removed, it being published increases, and we need to give people this advice. The reason it's taken so long is we've engaged specialists in cyber attacks who are forensically examining each of the servers in the facility. That's not a quick process, and it will at least be several days until the process of combing through each of the affected servers is complete. Now, it will be at least several days until that's complete. I don't want to suggest that it's only going to be several days until we're able to bring things back up online. Once we know what has happened here, there will then need to be a process of deciding how do we respond to that? Are we now confident that the problem has been solved? And how far back do we need to go in our backups to bring the systems back up?
Is there any risk to council employee data as well, or is it solely sort of public services that are impacted?
We've communicated with our own staff at the same time as we communicated with the public, but the risk, if there is a risk to council staff, is as customers rather than as employees. None of our payroll or HR data is stored on these servers.
Yeah. Obviously, it's early days into the investigation into this. You're working with Police Scotland and cyber specialists to investigate this, but have they given you any sort of early indication about where this has come from? Is it criminal hackers, or is it a state actor?
We're not going to go into detail about the investigation at this point for obvious reasons. We haven't received a ransom demand at this point. The risk, if there is a risk, is that data has been taken out of the system, and that's the only risk that we can see at this point. It's far too early to say what has happened, and we'll need to go through a process with colleagues in the police and the UK and Scottish governments to understand what we can say about this once we know more.
What does this cost the council in terms of recovery, disruption and consultancy? You know, do we have an early indication of what this kind of thing costs?
It's really far too early to say. It's not clear that there will be a financial loss to the council through these services not being available, because we've made alternate provision for people to engage with us. There will clearly be a cost in getting these services back up and running and in looking into what's happened, but it's really far too early to see what that's going to be.
Are you concerned at all about fines from the ICO about this?
We engaged with the ICO straight as soon as we understood that data may have been removed. Even though we were not able to say that it had been, we engage with the ICO all the time. We're very open and we'll give them any information they need. And again, it's far too early to say whether they would intend to investigate this and what they might do if they do.
Is this one of the worst cyber incidents that Glasgow City Council has faced?
It's certainly the first incident of this type that we've faced. I mean, it's hard to quantify what these things are and what the impact is, and it's certainly too early to say whether this is big or small. Certainly, the services that have been affected are services where we are confident we can put in place replacements. It hasn't stopped us from understanding our school roles. It hasn't stopped us from paying our staff or paying our subcontractors. So the bulk of the services that we provide are provided offline. It hasn't stopped us from carrying out any of our core functions.
Who's accountable for this? Has Glasgow City Council failed in its duty to protect public information?
Well, we, like all local authorities and public bodies, we have ICT providers who provide this for us. We work very closely with them on cyber security. If at the end of this process there has not been any data removed and there has been not a lot of damage done beyond the inconvenience, then I think we will be able to say that the systems we have in place worked. I think the problem that all bodies of any, not just public bodies, all bodies of any size have is the increasing sophistication of the kind of people who want to do these attacks. We've seen large bodies who are almost entirely dependent nowadays on online sales being subject to attacks, which have taken them offline for a significant length of time. It's far too early to say whether this could have been avoided, but certainly that's one of the things we're going to be looking at.
And just lastly then, as we said, people will be worried about this. How can people trust Glasgow City Council with their personal data going forward? What would your message to people be? Well,
our message to people, first of all, is take steps to make sure that you are safe. You should do this with any organisation that you interact with and share your data with. In the first instance, if somebody contacts you claiming to be from Glasgow City Council, if you have used any of these web forms, you should be particularly suspicious of that, and in particular suspicious if they ask you for payment details or password details. You should phone Police Scotland if you think that your data has been stolen. I mean, in future we will be engaging with the public and explaining to them the steps that we have taken to deal with what has happened here and to reassure people that we do have sufficient cybersecurity in place. I would reiterate that when we saw what was happening, we were able to very quickly isolate the servers, and we're extremely confident that it hasn't spread to any other part of our estate. That's great, thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't already spoken about? Nope, there is not. That's great. Thank you very much for that.